Silence has a sound. And in that room on that night, it screamed louder than any gunshot ever could. Before we continue, leave a comment below answering one simple question. Do you believe real power needs to be loud? Or does it live in silence? What you are about to hear is not a story about rage or violence or sudden bloodshed. It is something far more unsettling. It is the moment when a joke was made, and every man in the room understood that his life could end without a single word being raised. If you are new here, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments as this story unfolds. The air was thick with cigar smoke and unspoken tension. Heavy oak walls absorbed decades of whispered deals, broken promises, and silent verdicts. Around the table sat men who ruled entire neighborhoods without ever showing their faces in daylight. Each one carried power, reputation, and an army of loyal soldiers beyond those doors. Yet none of them felt comfortable. Not while Don Vito Corleone sat at the head of the table. He did not dominate the room by force. He did not raise his voice. He barely moved. His presence alone bent the space around him, like gravity. Every man there had come seeking something, even those who pretended otherwise. Favors, protection, forgiveness, or simply reassurance that they were still standing on the right side of history. Among them was a mob boss who had risen quickly, too quickly. His suits were sharper, his smile louder, his confidence bordering on arrogance. He believed momentum was the same as power. He believed success granted immunity. And worst of all, he believed humor could disguise intention. The meeting unfolded calmly at first. Business was discussed. Borders were defined. Old agreements were reaffirmed with polite nods. Don Vito listened more than he spoke, his eyes half closed as if resting. But those who truly knew him understood that this was when he was most alert. He watched not words but pauses, not gestures but hesitation. He listened to what was not being said. Then it happened. The young boss leaned back in his chair, exhaling smoke with a grin that lingered a second too long. His tone was playful, almost careless. He spoke of loyalty, of changing times, of how alliances were becoming flexible. And then, wrapped in laughter, came the line that froze the room. He joked about betrayal, not directly, not openly, just enough to test the air, enough to see if the old rules still applied, enough to suggest that perhaps, someday, even Don Vito Corleone could be replaced. A few men shifted in their seats. One reached for his glass but stopped halfway. Another stared at the table, pretending to study the wood grain. No one laughed. No one breathed comfortably. All eyes moved, slowly, toward Don Vito. He did not react. No tightening of the jaw, no glare, no visible sign of offense. His fingers remained gently folded, his breathing unchanged. For several seconds the room existed in a painful suspension, waiting for thunder that never came. Then Don Vito opened his eyes. He did not look at the man immediately. Instead, he glanced around the table, acknowledging each presence with a calm that felt deliberate, almost merciful. Only after that did his gaze settle on the one who had spoken, and when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost kind. He commented on the nature of jokes, on how men often reveal their true thoughts when they believe laughter will protect them. He spoke of trust, not as an ideal, but as a fragile structure that takes years to build and seconds to destroy. No threats were made, no names were mentioned, no punishments described. Yet something irreversible happened in that moment. The joke was no longer a joke, and everyone in the room understood that Don Vito had just delivered a verdict without ever raising his voice. The young boss tried to smile again, but this time, it did not reach his eyes, and that was when the fear truly began to settle in. The silence that followed Don Vito's words was heavier than before. It was no longer uncertainty, it was understanding. The young boss felt it first. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by a rigid stillness he could not control. He realized too late that Don Vito had not dismissed the joke. He had dissected it, stripped it of humor, exposed it as intention. Don Vito leaned slightly forward, just enough to signal that what came next mattered. His voice remained calm, steady, almost instructional. He spoke about men who confuse speed with strength and ambition with wisdom. He explained that power built too fast often rests on weak foundations, and weak foundations collapse without warning. No one interrupted him. No one dared. He spoke as if telling an old story, one he had seen repeated across decades. Men who laughed too loudly, Men who believed fear was enough to rule. Men who mistook attention for respect. Each sentence landed softly, yet carried the weight of a warning carved from experience. The young boss nodded, forcing agreement, but his mind raced. He searched Don Vito's face for anger and found none. That frightened him more than fury ever could. Anger is predictable. Calm is not. Around the table, the others understood the lesson being delivered was not meant for one man alone. It was for everyone present. A reminder of the invisible line that could not be crossed. A reminder that Don Vito did not need to threaten because the system he built enforced his will long before words became necessary. Don Vito paused, allowing the room to absorb his meaning. Then he shifted the conversation back to business as if nothing unusual had occurred. Territories were mentioned again, numbers exchanged, agreements reaffirmed, but everything had changed. The young boss spoke less now. When he did, his voice was cautious, measured. He no longer leaned back. He leaned in, as though proximity might restore the balance he had lost. Don Vito noticed everything. He noticed how the man avoided eye contact, how his hands tightened when loyalty was mentioned again, how confidence had transformed into calculation. Don Vito understood fear intimately. He knew how it altered behavior, how it exposed truth. At one point, Don Vito addressed him directly, asking a simple question about a shipment delay. The young boss answered immediately, too quickly, eager to demonstrate reliability. Don Vito nodded, satisfied, but said nothing further. That silence was deliberate, because Don Vito did not correct men in public unless correction was unavoidable. He believed humiliation bred resentment, and resentment bred betrayal. Instead, he allowed men to correct themselves, to feel the weight of their own mistakes internally. That weight was far more effective. As the meeting continued, the atmosphere slowly normalized on the surface. Cigars were relit, drinks were refilled. A few low chuckles returned, cautious and brief, but beneath it all, an invisible mark had been placed. The young boss had been seen, and being seen by Don Vito Corleone meant something far deeper than being noticed. It meant being evaluated, measured, and remembered. When the meeting finally drew to a close, Don Vito stood with effort, supported briefly by one of his men. As he prepared to leave, he turned once more toward the table. His eyes rested again on the young boss just for a second. No words were exchanged, but in that glance was a message clearer than any threat. Intentions have consequences, even when disguised as jokes. As Don Vito exited the room, the young boss exhaled sharply, only then realizing how long he had been holding his breath. He told himself it was over, that nothing had happened, that he had imagined the danger. He was wrong, because what Don Vito had done was not respond in the moment. He had begun a process, and processes, in Don Vito's world, never ended quickly. The days that followed unfolded with unsettling normality. On the surface, nothing had changed. Businesses operated as usual. Payments arrived on time. Messages were answered promptly. To an untrained eye, the young boss had survived the meeting unscathed. But Don Vito Corleone did not measure reality by appearances. From his study, surrounded by old books and quieter thoughts, Don Vito listened. He listened to reports that were not reports, to conversations that were not meant for him, to patterns others overlooked. He never rushed judgment. He believed haste was the luxury of insecure men. He asked simple questions of trusted lieutenants, not accusations, just observations. Who spoke to whom? Who hesitated? Who suddenly grew generous? He noticed that the young boss had begun reaching outward, testing relationships beyond his traditional circle. Not aggressively, carefully, as if trying to ensure options existed. Don Vito understood this instinct well. Fear pushes men to seek exits. Still, he did nothing. That restraint was intentional. He believed that men reveal their deepest intentions when they believe they are no longer being watched. And so Don Vito watched without being seen. He allowed time to stretch, because time was an ally to those who were patient. Meanwhile, the young boss felt the pressure grow without understanding why. He sensed doors closing quietly, invitations arriving later than usual, messages returning shorter, colder, no confrontation, no explanation, just subtle shifts that made him question his standing. At night, he replayed the meeting in his mind, the calm voice, the gentle words, the look that followed. He tried to convince himself it meant nothing, that Don Vito was old, that influence fades, that the world was changing. Yet every instinct told him the opposite. Don Vito's power had never depended on speed or fear alone. It was built on memory, on balance, on the knowledge that loyalty rewarded generously, and betrayal was not punished emotionally but structurally. He did not destroy men. He removed the ground beneath them. Weeks passed. Then came the smallest adjustment. A shipment rerouted. Not cancelled, not seized, just delayed. The explanation was reasonable. Mechanical issues, weather, logistics, the kind of problem no one could argue against. The young boss absorbed the loss quietly, telling himself it was coincidence. Then another delay came, and another. Each time the cause was different. Each time the explanation was polite. Each time the effect was the same. Pressure increased. Margins tightened. Trust wavered among his own men. He began asking questions, receiving vague answers. What frightened him most was that no one mentioned Don Vito. His name never came up. That absence was louder than accusation. It meant everyone understood without needing to speak. Don Vito, meanwhile, remained distant. He sent no messages, made no demands, offered no clarification. In his mind, the young boss was not being punished. He was being observed under strain. How a man behaves when pressure mounts reveals more than any meeting ever could. Would he blame others? Would he grow reckless? Would he reach for protection outside the family structure? Or would he correct himself, return to humility, and realign his loyalty? One evening, Don Vito received a visitor, a quiet man, loyal, unremarkable to outsiders, the kind of man who hears everything because no one notices him. He reported that the young boss had made discreet contact with a rival family. Nothing concrete, just conversation, just curiosity. Don Vito closed his eyes briefly. That was enough. Not because betrayal had occurred, but because the path toward it had been chosen. Don Vito believed that intention, once formed, rarely dissolves. It only waits. Still, he did not act immediately. Instead, he prepared the room. He spoke privately to allies, adjusted expectations, strengthened bonds where needed. He ensured that when the moment came, it would feel inevitable rather than dramatic. He wanted no chaos, only correction. The young boss, sensing the walls closing in, requested a meeting. He framed it as respect, as clarification, as a desire to reaffirm loyalty. The message reached Don Vito late in the evening. Don Vito read it once. He nodded slowly, and he agreed to the meeting, because now the process he had begun could finally move to its next stage. The meeting was scheduled for late afternoon, at a location chosen by Don Vito. Neutral ground. Familiar, but never casual. The kind of place where men spoke carefully, knowing history listened from the walls. The young boss arrived early. That alone revealed his state of mind. He adjusted his jacket twice while waiting, rehearsing phrases he hoped would sound sincere rather than desperate. He told himself this was a conversation between equals, yet his body betrayed him. His posture was rigid, his breathing shallow. Don Vito entered without ceremony. No entourage, no display, just two men walking behind him, silent and still. He acknowledged the young boss with a nod and took his seat. For a moment, neither spoke. Don Vito allowed silence to stretch, not as intimidation, but as permission. Permission for truth to surface. The young boss spoke first. He expressed respect, gratitude. He spoke of misunderstandings, of the dangers of careless words. He said jokes had been taken too far. He insisted loyalty had never wavered. His voice was controlled, but beneath it ran urgency. Don Vito listened without interruption. When the man finished, Don Vito folded his hands and spoke softly. He said he believed the young boss, or at least, he believed that the man wanted to believe himself. He spoke about how loyalty is not proven by words spoken in moments of comfort, but by choices made when alternatives appear. He did not accuse. He described patterns. He mentioned how alliances form quietly, how curiosity can slowly become temptation, how men convince themselves they are only protecting their future, not betraying their present. His tone was almost compassionate. The young boss swallowed hard. Don Vito continued, explaining that power is not the freedom to explore every option. Power is the discipline to reject most of them. He said that jokes about betrayal are rarely jokes at all. They are rehearsals. The word hung in the air. Rehearsals. The young boss tried to respond, but Don Vito raised a hand gently, not to silence him, but to pause him. He explained that this meeting was not about punishment. It was about alignment, about deciding whether the foundation could still be trusted. He then offered a choice, not between life and death, between proximity and distance. The young boss would retain his territory, his income, his name, but certain privileges would be withdrawn. Certain routes rerouted permanently. Certain relationships would no longer be accessible, not as revenge, but as insulation, a reduction of risk for everyone involved. Don Vito framed it as protection from himself. The young boss understood what was truly being said. He would remain alive but diminished, watched, contained. His ascent halted not by violence, but by structure, by limits he could not openly challenge without confirming every fear Don Vito already held. Agreeing meant survival with restraint. Refusing meant exposure. He agreed. Don Vito nodded once. The matter was settled. No handshake followed. No warmth, just closure. As they stood to leave, Don Vito offered one final thought. He said that respect is not demanded and fear is unreliable. But consistency creates order. And order, when maintained long enough, becomes legacy. The young boss watched him walk away, realizing the full weight of what had occurred. He had not been destroyed. He had been placed exactly where Don Vito wanted him. And that placement was permanent. Outside, the city moved on unaware. Cars passed. Voices echoed. Life continued. But one man now understood that calm responses are often the most terrifying, because they leave no room to fight back. Don Vito returned home that evening and sat quietly, reflecting not on the young boss, but on the system itself. He believed leadership was not about eliminating threats, but about absorbing them without disturbance. Yet even he knew that containment has limits, and that sometimes silence must eventually give way to finality. Time passed, and with it came acceptance. The young boss adjusted to his reduced world. He stopped reaching outward. He stopped testing boundaries. Publicly, he became the image of cooperation and restraint. Privately, the frustration never left him. But frustration without options turns inward, and inward pressure changes a man. Don Vito observed from a distance, satisfied not because he had won, but because balance had been restored. For him, victory was never about humiliation or dominance. It was about continuity, about ensuring that the structure outlived the ambitions of any single man, including his own. Those around Don Vito spoke of the incident in fragments, never directly. They did not mention the joke. They did not describe the response. They only spoke of the outcome, and the outcome was clear. No one joked about betrayal again. What terrified them was not what Don Vito did. It was what he did not need to do. He did not raise his voice. He did not issue threats. He did not spill blood to make a point. He allowed a man to reveal himself, then quietly adjusted the world around him until the correct lesson was learned. That restraint required confidence few men possessed. Don Vito believed that violence was a failure of imagination. Anyone could destroy. Very few could control. Control required patience, memory, and an understanding of human nature that could not be taught, only earned through decades of watching men betray themselves. In the end, the joke became legend, not because it was clever, but because of the response it provoked. Men who heard the story later did not repeat the words spoken. They repeated the silence. They spoke of the pause, the calm, the way fear entered the room without being invited, and they understood. Don Vito Corleone was feared not because he punished betrayal, but because he recognized it before it fully existed. He understood that power does not announce itself. It waits. It listens. And when it moves, it does so quietly, leaving no chaos behind. As years passed, others would rise and fall. Styles would change. Faces would disappear. But the lesson remained intact, passed down not as a warning, but as wisdom. Never mistake calm for weakness. Never confuse humor with safety. And never forget that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one who speaks the least. Because when he finally does, the decision has already been made.